The night was heavy and silent across the wide desert plains. Wind rolled over the sand, carrying the dry smell of dust and heat, and the sky above stretched endless, full of stars that blinked like a million silent eyes. In the middle of this emptiness stood an isolated research base, half forgotten by the world, where only a handful of workers kept the lights burning. Among them was Mark, a man whose life had never been more than routine and quiet duty. He was not a soldier, not a scientist, just a technician who checked wires and repaired broken panels. Yet on this night, his life was about to step into a story larger than anything he could have imagined. It began with the tremor. A low sound first, like thunder buried deep underground, shaking the earth beneath his boots. Mark stopped, gripping the railing of the watchtower where he was checking a loose wire, and turned his head to the horizon. The desert was glowing. A strange light, silver and alive, split the darkness as if the stars themselves had fallen to earth. For a moment, he thought it was a meteor. Then it slowed, descending with unnatural control, and the sand leapt into the air as something vast landed not far from the base. The alarm screamed. Sirens ripped through the silence, red lights spinning along the walls. The workers poured out of their stations, fear etched across their faces. Some shouted into radios calling for the military, while others simply froze, staring at the dust cloud rising in the distance. Mark felt his chest tighten, but he did not move. Something deep inside told him this moment was different, that running would not matter. Through the cloud came a shape. First a shadow, then a figure, tall beyond belief. 8 feet at least. Its outline broad and heavy, shoulders wide enough to dwarf a man, each step sinking deep into the sand. Its skin, if it could be called skin, shimmered in the moonlight like armor made from black stone. In its hand, it carried something long and sharp, a weapon or tool, glowing faintly with an inner fire. The base fell silent as the figure approached. Mark's heart pounded, each beat echoing in his ears, yet he could not look away. The creature moved with purpose, not wild or reckless but steady, its every step sending vibrations through the ground. Soldiers arrived, weapons raised, spreading across the front of the base. Orders were shouted, guns locked, and the air thickened with the sharp taste of fear. The alien stopped just outside the floodlights, its height making even the armed men seem like children. It looked across them all, silent, its face unreadable. And then its gaze landed on Mark. The moment was so sharp it cut through everything. Mark felt it pierce him, as though the alien could see deeper than flesh, straight into the marrow of his bones. His throat went dry. He should have hidden, should have stepped back like everyone else, but instead his body betrayed him. He stepped forward. Whispers broke out among the soldiers. Some called him mad, others shouted for him to stop. But he kept walking, slow, each step heavier than the last. The red lights flashed across his face, painting him in warning, yet his eyes stayed fixed on the towering figure. He had no weapon, no armor, nothing to shield him but his own fragile courage. The alien straightened. It lifted its weapon, the glow intensifying. Gasps and shouts rose from the humans, fingers tightening on triggers, but no one fired. The silence was absolute, as if the desert itself was holding its breath. Mark stood now only a few paces away. His body trembled, but he did not look down. His eyes locked with the creature's, a silent challenge, or perhaps a plea. He remembered his brother, the war that had taken him years ago, a war born of fear and misunderstanding. He had promised himself he would never let such blindness rule his heart again. And so he faced the impossible, not as a soldier, not as a hero, but as a man who refused to run. The alien moved. Its weapon rose higher, aimed directly at him, and the light blazed like fire ready to consume. Mark felt the heat against his skin. His breath caught, but still he did not break. Behind him, soldiers shouted to fire, their nerves cracking under the pressure, yet he lifted his hand. Not in defense, but in a strange, desperate gesture of peace. For a heartbeat, the world froze. Human and alien, predator and fragile man, locked in a moment that seemed endless. Then, with a sound like grinding stone, the alien shifted. Instead of striking, it stepped closer and lowered the weapon slightly, tilting its head as if trying to understand. The soldiers did not believe their eyes. Murmurs ran through the line, confusion mixing with fear. Mark's breath returned in a shudder. He realized the alien was studying him, not as prey, but as something else. Its eyes glowed faintly, reflecting the floodlights, and in them he saw not pure hatred, but something more complex. The night air grew colder, pressing in around them. The alien extended a massive hand, claws glinting, reaching toward him. The motion was slow, deliberate, impossible to mistake for an attack, yet the weight of it made Mark's chest tighten as though his ribs would crack. He had only seconds to decide, stand his ground or retreat. Every instinct screamed to step back, but he remembered the panic in the base, the trembling voices on the radios, the soldiers itching to unleash fire that could ignite a war. If he moved now, if he faltered, everything could collapse. So he stayed. The hand stopped just before touching him. The alien's fingers curled slightly, as though testing his size, measuring him. The air buzzed with tension, every soul at the base frozen in disbelief. Mark's knees wanted to give, but he held firm. His silence, his stillness, was louder than any weapon. And then the alien closed its hand, not to crush, but to lift. In a single motion, Mark was raised from the ground, his feet dangling in the air. Gasps and cries broke out behind him. The creature held him high, studying him with a gaze that carried the weight of a distant world. The stars above seemed to blink slower, the desert quieter, as if the universe itself leaned in to witness. Mark's life hung by a thread, suspended in the grip of something that could end him without effort. Yet in his heart, beneath the fear, a strange calm began to grow. He was no longer running, no longer hiding. He was face to face with the unknown, and in that terrifying moment, he understood this was only the beginning. The soldiers could hardly breathe as they watched. Mark lifted into the air like a child in the grip of a giant hand. Their fingers tightened on their weapons, but none dared to fire, because a single mistake could mean his death. The desert air was cold, and the floodlights painted long shadows across the ground, making the alien seem even larger, its black skin glimmering like polished stone. Mark dangled above the earth, his chest tight, his legs kicking lightly, though he tried to hold them still. The alien's eyes, glowing faintly in the night, studied him with a silence that felt heavier than thunder. Inside Mark's mind, fear burned like fire. His thoughts screamed for him to struggle, to shout, to beg for release. But another part of him, quieter yet stronger, told him to remain calm. He could feel the creature's strength in the way its fingers curled around him, not crushing, but firm enough to remind him how small and weak he truly was. He remembered how his brother had once stood on a battlefield and been lost to panic, killed in a war that had begun because no one dared to pause, no one dared to try to understand. Mark swore he would not let fear rule him now. The alien tilted. Its head, the glow in its eyes flickering like the reflection of stars in water. Its breath came in slow, deep waves that stirred the air. It brought him closer, so close he could see the rough texture of its skin, almost like armor, and the faint lines of scars etched across its chest. These were not marks of a creature without purpose. This was not a mindless beast. Something inside Mark whispered that it was watching him as carefully as he was watching it, searching for meaning. On the ground, the soldiers shouted at him to stay still, to hold on, to trust that they would find a way. Their voices broke under the weight of fear. The commander barked orders, but his eyes betrayed doubt. They had never faced something like this. No training, no weapon test, no battlefield manual could tell them what to do when a being taller than any man, stronger than steel, stood before them, holding one of their own like a feather. Mark opened his mouth, his voice trembling but clear enough to carry through the silence. He spoke slowly, with no clever words, only the truth in his heart. He told the alien he meant no harm. His voice cracked, but he forced himself to continue, saying that if it had come to destroy them, it could have done so already, but it had not. The alien's eyes narrowed, the sound of its breathing deepening, and then, to everyone's shock, it lowered him gently back to the ground. His legs wobbled when his boots touched the sand, but he forced himself to stand straight. The alien leaned closer, its weapon still glowing faintly in its hand, the heat of it brushing against his skin. For a moment, Mark thought it might change its mind and strike. Instead, it drew a line in the sand with the tip of its weapon, a single mark glowing red against the darkness. It pointed at him, then at the soldiers behind him, then at the line. None understood the meaning, but Mark felt it was not random. It was trying to communicate. He crouched down, his hand shaking, and drew a circle in the sand on his side of the line. Then he pointed at himself, then at the circle, then at the alien. The creature tilted its head again, studying the crude symbol, before it raised one massive hand and traced another shape beside the line. Strange and complex, unlike anything human. Its claw pressed deep into the ground, the lines glowing faintly, as though the very earth responded to its touch. The soldiers whispered among themselves, some calling it a trap, others insisting it was trying to speak. The commander raised his weapon, barking at Mark to move away, but Mark refused. He stood between the soldiers and the alien, his arms spread wide. He shouted at them not to fire, his voice desperate but firm, and for a moment, the entire base froze. The alien gave a sound then, deep and vibrating, a mix between thunder and the grinding of stone. The noise rolled across the desert and rattled the windows of the base. Mark winced, covering his ears, but he caught the rhythm within the sound, almost like words, though not in any tongue he knew. It was not a roar of anger. It was something else, something that wanted to be understood. Mark's heart pounded as he realized what this meant. This was not an attack. It was communication. The alien had not raised its weapon in violence. It had not struck when it easily could have. Instead, it had chosen to speak in the only way it knew. He looked back at the soldiers, their eyes full of confusion, fear, and mistrust. He saw the commander's finger hover near the trigger of his weapon, and his chest grew tight. One wrong move could end everything. So he did the only thing he could think of. He stepped fully across the glowing line the alien had drawn, leaving his people behind, and walked until he stood face to face with the towering creature again. Gasps rose from the base, cries of disbelief, but he ignored them. He lifted his hands slowly, palms open, showing he carried no weapon, no threat, only himself. The alien's glow flickered once more, and then it lowered its weapon completely, embedding the tip into the sand. The heat dimmed, and the desert seemed to exhale. For the first time, the alien reached not with strength, but with a gesture almost like curiosity. It tapped its chest with one massive claw, a slow and deliberate motion. Mark realized it was giving him something, perhaps a name or a sign of identity. He tapped his own chest in return, saying simply, "Mark." His voice was quiet, but steady. For a moment, there was no reaction. Then the alien repeated the sound, a rough echo of his name, distorted, but recognizable. The entire base fell silent. The impossible had just happened. The alien straightened to its full height again, towering above him, and then raised its weapon once more. Soldiers shouted, weapons ready, fear surging back in waves. But instead of attacking, The alien aimed the weapon at the sky, and a beam of light erupted upward, tearing through the stars. Within the beam, images shimmered like a hologram. Worlds broken, skies burning, oceans turned to dust. A planet crumbling, dying. The alien turned its gaze back to Mark, and with the slow weight of meaning, pointed at the earth. The message was clear, though terrifying. It had come here with purpose. Mark's body grew cold as the truth settled on him. The alien was not just visiting. It needed something that might cost Earth more than it could bear. The desert was filled with a beam of light that cut through the sky like a sword. Every human eye turned upward as the images within the beam shifted like smoke and fire. Broken lands stretched across the night sky. Oceans drained to cracked ground. Mountains split and burning. The alien's dying world was laid bare for all to see. No one spoke, not the soldiers holding their weapons, not the commander whose face was stiff with fear, not even Mark who stood closest to the towering figure. The silence was a silence of truth, of something greater than any one man or nation. Mark's breath trembled in his chest as the images faded and the night became dark again. He understood now. The creature had not come to destroy without reason. It had come out of desperation. He turned to look at the soldiers, their eyes wide and confused. He could see doubt in their faces. They wanted to believe their weapons could protect them, but he could see their fear of the unknown. He turned back to the alien, who stood still as stone, its eyes glowing faintly. It pointed at the earth again, at the ground beneath their feet. As if demanding something hidden below, Mark's mind raced. He thought of the tunnels he had worked in, the mines beneath the desert where rare minerals had been discovered long ago, minerals strong enough to power machines or tear them apart. Could that be what the alien wanted? A substance from deep within the planet? He could not be sure, but the way the creature's eyes burned told him it needed this, and without it, perhaps its entire race was finished. The commander broke the silence at last, shouting that the creature was demanding Earth itself, that it would strip the world bare and leave them all in ruin. Fear rolled through the soldiers like a wave, and weapons began to rise again. Mark's heart tightened. If they fired now, the chance for peace would be gone forever. He shouted for them to stop, his voice carrying across the desert. He told them they were blind if they thought bullets could solve this. He begged them to see what he saw, not a monster, but a people on the edge of death reaching out in the only way they knew. The alien lowered its weapon again, pressing the tip into the sand as if to say it did not want to fight. Then it turned its glowing eyes back to Mark and stepped closer. The earth shook under its heavy steps. When it stopped, its massive shadow fell over him, and it lowered itself slightly, its face leaning closer, almost at his level. Its eyes reflected the floodlights like molten glass. Mark raised his hands slowly, palms open. He took a breath and then pointed at himself, then at the ground, then downwards, as if to say, "You want something deep below." The alien tilted its head, and for the first time, it made a softer sound, low and rumbling, like the growl of distant thunder. It pressed one hand to its chest again, repeating the same gesture it had given before when trying to show its identity. Then it pointed with a claw at the sand and traced the shape of a spiral, a downward motion, and finally tapped the earth so hard the ground shuddered. Mark knew then he was right. It wanted what was beneath, but what cost would Earth have to pay for that gift? The commander barked at him to step back, saying they could not let it dig into the planet. Not when they did not know what it was taking. But Mark ignored him. He looked at the alien again, feeling a strange weight settle on his shoulders. He was only a technician, only a man who fixed panels and wires, yet in this moment, he felt as if he carried the voice of his entire species. He swallowed the lump in his throat and spoke, even though he knew the alien would not understand the words. He said that if it wanted trust, it had to give trust as well. He said that if it wanted the Earth to give something, it must promise not to destroy it. His words fell into the desert night, carried away by the cold wind. But something in the alien's eyes shifted, as though it felt the meaning even without knowing the sound. The soldiers behind him muttered in disbelief. Some cursed, saying he was risking everything by standing so close. Others whispered that, maybe, just maybe, he was reaching the creature in a way none of them could. The commander's voice grew harsh, threatening to drag him back by force. But no one moved, for even the bravest of them feared crossing the glowing line the alien had drawn in the sand. The alien extended its hand again, slow and deliberate, palm open. Mark hesitated, his breath tight, every muscle in his body screaming not to move, yet he stepped forward. His hand shook as he raised it, and when his palm touched the alien's skin, rough and hot like stone baked in the sun, floodlights flickered across the base as if some unseen energy had passed between them. The alien's eyes brightened, and for the first time, it gave a sound that was not harsh or grinding, but almost like a tone deep and heavy, vibrating through the air like the echo of a bell dot. In that moment, Mark understood. This was not the meeting of enemies. This was the first fragile bridge between two worlds. The alien released the beam of light again. But this time the images were different. It showed not only the broken world it came from, but also a figure of its own kind collapsing, sick and weak, the body wasting away. Then it showed the spiral again, the mineral deep beneath the earth. And finally, it showed two figures, one tall like the alien, one small like a human, standing side by side. The message was clear now. It was not asking for war. It was asking for help. The soldiers could not understand all of it, but Mark saw their faces soften, their weapons lowering slightly, their fear clashing with the image of an entire race facing death. Yet the commander stood rigid, his jaw locked, his eyes hard. He muttered that helping the alien meant betraying humanity, that giving it what it wanted could doom the planet. He swore they had to act before it was too late. His words dripped with fear, and Mark saw the way the men shifted uneasily, torn between obedience and doubt. Mark stepped closer to the alien, keeping his back to the soldiers. His voice was calm, though his heart beat like a drum. He said he would help, that he would go down into the earth with the alien, that he would see for himself what it truly wanted. He spoke not just for himself, but for all of them, a single human willing to risk everything so that fear would not be their answer. The alien's eyes glowed brighter, and it bowed its head ever so slightly, a gesture that carried more weight than words. The desert night grew colder, and the wind rose, carrying dust across the base. Mark stood with the towering figure beside him, knowing he had crossed a line that could never be erased. He had chosen trust where others saw only danger. He had chosen to become the bridge. And though fear still clawed at him, he felt for the first time that the fate of two worlds now rested in his hands. The desert winds howled as the night dragged on, carrying grains of sand that stung the skin and rattled against metal walls of the base. The beam of light had faded now, leaving only memory in the minds of those who had witnessed it, and with that memory came doubt and fear. Soldiers moved restlessly, their hands never far from their weapons, eyes locked on the towering alien and the man who stood beside it. Mark felt the weight of every gaze, some heavy with anger, some with fear, some with silent hope. He knew what he had promised, and he knew it could not be taken back. The commander's voice cut through the night like a blade. He shouted that Mark had lost his mind, that helping the alien meant betraying their own world. He warned that the creature's story was nothing more than a trick to dig into Earth's heart and take what it wanted, leaving them broken. His words were sharp, meant to stir fear, but Mark stood firm. He turned to face the soldiers and told them that war born of fear was the oldest mistake of humankind, the mistake that had cost him his brother, the mistake that had scarred their history time and time again. He said he would not repeat it. The alien stood silent, its massive form unmoving, but its eyes glowed faintly as if it understood the storm raging between the humans. When Mark looked up at it, he felt no malice, no hunger for destruction, only a weight of sorrow too deep for words. The alien tapped its weapon into the sand again, the earth vibrating beneath their feet, and then it gestured toward the distant hills where the old mine shafts cut into the ground like wounds. Mark understood at once. That was where it needed to go. The commander refused. He barked orders that no one would escort the creature into the tunnels, that they would seal the mines and call for reinforcements, that firepower was the only language such a being could understand. Yet no soldier moved. Their eyes shifted between their leader and the man who had touched the alien's skin and lived, the man who had crossed the glowing line when none of them dared. Doubt gnawed at their obedience. Mark stepped forward. His voice was quiet, but strong. He said he would go, whether they joined him or not. He said he would descend into the mines with the alien and face whatever truth lay beneath. Because if they turned away now, if they closed their eyes and let fear decide, they might never know peace with this being or its people. He looked at the faces before him, and though many shook their heads, none stopped him. The alien moved then, slow and deliberate, striding toward the hills. Its steps thundered across the desert, and the ground trembled as if the planet itself felt its weight. Mark followed, his boots sinking into the sand, his heart beating fast but steady. The base grew smaller behind him, the voices fading until only the wind remained. The entrance to the mines yawned like the mouth of the earth, black and wide, edges crumbling from years of abandonment. Mark paused at the threshold, staring into the darkness that smelled of dust and iron. Memories of collapsed tunnels and suffocating silence clawed at his mind. He had worked in mines before, patching cables, fixing lights, but he had never gone deeper than safety allowed. To walk into the belly of the earth with a giant alien beside him felt like stepping into the unknown abyss of fate itself. The alien did not hesitate. It ducked its massive frame and entered, its glowing weapon casting faint light across the stone. Mark swallowed hard and followed, his footsteps echoing in the hollow air. The walls pressed close, the ceiling low in places, and the deeper they went, the colder it became. Drips of water echoed like whispers, and the shadows twisted across the jagged stone. As they descended, Mark's voice broke the silence. He spoke not in command but in confession, telling the alien of the wars that had torn humanity apart, of the mistrust that had burned bridges before they could be built, of the pain he carried. For the brother he had lost to violence that never should have happened. His words were soft, almost lost in the hollow dark, but the alien's slow, steady breathing told him it listened. At one point, the tunnel narrowed, forcing them to squeeze through. Mark pressed against the wall, his chest scraping stone, his breath quick and shallow. He thought of turning back, of running, but the alien pressed forward with calm determination, and somehow that steadiness gave him strength. When they emerged into a larger chamber, the ground shook beneath their feet, dust falling from the ceiling. The mine was unstable, the air heavy with the taste of danger. The alien raised its weapon and pointed at the far wall where veins of strange mineral glowed faintly within the rock, shimmering like captured starlight. Mark had never seen anything like it, veins of silver-blue light pulsing as if alive. The alien's eyes flared, and for the first time, it released a sound not of sorrow or demand but of hope. Low and trembling yet alive, Mark stepped closer, his hand brushing the stone. The glow spread slightly under his touch, like water rippling at a drop. He realized then this was no ordinary mineral. Whatever it was, it pulsed with energy unlike anything he had known. He understood why the alien had come, why its world might need it. But he also understood the danger. To pull too much of it, to strip it from the earth, could weaken the very ground they stood on. Before he could speak, the mine rumbled. Rocks cracked and tumbled from above, smashing into the ground. The alien grabbed him with one massive hand and pulled him back as part of the ceiling caved, dust choking the chamber. Mark coughed, his lungs burning, but he saw the alien shield him with its own body, taking the brunt of the falling stone across its armored skin. When the rumble faded, the chamber was half collapsed, and the exit behind them blocked with rock. Mark's heart sank. They were trapped. The alien turned its gaze on him, its eyes flickering with something that looked almost like regret. It tapped its chest, then the mineral, then gestured toward the ceiling as if to say it had failed. But Mark shook his head. He stepped forward, coughing through the dust, and pressed his hand to the glowing vein again. He looked up at the towering being, and said he would not give up, not when both their worlds now depended on this moment. The alien studied him, silent and still, before lowering its weapon, embedding it into the ground. It knelt, a giant bowing in the dust, and together they began to clear the rubble by hand. Stone by stone, human and alien side by side. The chamber shook again, each rumble threatening to bring it all down. Sweat stung Mark's eyes, his muscles screamed, and blood cut across his knuckles. But he kept digging, refusing to stop. At last, through the dust and darkness, a faint crack of open air appeared, a thread of night sky glimmering like salvation. Mark's chest heaved with hope, but even as the way cleared, the ground gave a terrible groan. Another collapse was coming, heavier than before. He turned to the alien, whose massive frame stood between him and the falling stone, and he understood in an instant what choice lay ahead. Either one of them would make it out, or both would die here together. The alien reached for him, shoving him toward the narrow crack, its eyes burning with urgency. But Mark planted his feet and shook his head. He had promised trust, and he would not break it. If one of them was to survive, it would not be by sacrifice alone. It would be by standing together. The tunnel shook once more, and the earth prepared to decide their fate. The air inside the alien chamber was thick with tension as the human stood, facing the towering alien who looked down at him with eyes that glowed like cold fire, and though every instinct in his body screamed at him to run, he did not move because he knew there was no escape, and this was the moment that would decide everything. For him and for those waiting beyond the walls of this strange place, and he had risked everything to come here. And now there was nothing left but to face what was before him. The alien stepped closer, and its heavy body made the ground tremble, each step sounding like the strike of a hammer, and still the human did not flinch. He raised his hands not in surrender, but in a show of will, as if to say, he would not bow, he would not be crushed into silence. And the alien stopped and tilted its head, almost as if studying him, trying to understand why such a small, fragile creature would dare stand in front of it. Without shaking, the alien spoke in a voice that rumbled like thunder, asking, "Why do you risk so much for a people who will never even know what you faced here?" And the human answered with steady words, "Because courage is not about being known. It is about doing what is right, even when no one is watching." And the alien was silent for a long time. The human could feel the beating of his heart echoing in his chest like a drum, but he kept his eyes locked on the creature before him, and slowly he began to speak of the world he came from. He spoke of the skies painted with sunsets, of the laughter of children running through fields, of the quiet strength of people who worked hard and lived with hope even when life was harsh. He spoke of his home not as a place of power or conquest, but as a place of spirit and dreams, and he told the alien that if he had to give his life to defend that spirit, then he would do so without hesitation, because life without meaning was not life at all. Alien listened, and its sharp gaze softened, though its body was still like a mountain. It asked again, "Do you not fear me? Do you not fear that your death will be forgotten in the dust of time?" And the human answered, "I fear nothing more than a life without purpose. I fear nothing more than silence when I should speak." And still the alien studied him as though searching for weakness, but what it found instead was a flame burning bright and steady, and in that moment, the great alien let out a sound that was not anger, but something like respect. The alien raised one massive arm, and for a breath, the human thought it was the end, yet the arm did not strike. It lowered, slowly until its clawed hand pressed against the ground before the human, like a warrior saluting another, and in that gesture, the human understood he had done what no weapon could. He had earned respect, and in that silence the walls of the chamber seemed to change. The lights dimmed, and the great alien stepped back, turning away, as if to let him go. The human felt his legs heavy, but he forced himself to stand tall as he walked toward the passage that opened behind him, and though fear still lingered in his bones, it was carried away by the knowledge that he had faced something greater than himself and had not been broken. And when he stepped outside, the waiting eyes of his people turned to him, and though he had no grand words, he looked at them and simply said, "We are free," and they understood. They did not cheer, they did not shout, they stood in silence and let the weight of his words sink into their hearts, because freedom won through courage was not something to take lightly, it was something to guard and remember. And the human looked back one last time at the place where the alien still stood watching, and in that gaze, there was no more threat. There was only recognition of two beings who had crossed a boundary and understood one another in a way words could never capture. Human walked forward, then every step lighter than the last, as if the chains that had once pressed on him and his people had fallen away, and though he knew there would be new trials ahead, he also knew they would never again face them with fear, for they had learned that even the smallest among them could stand against giants when the cause was just and the heart was steady. And so he carried that truth with him like a torch, lighting the path forward. In the days that followed, his people began to rebuild. They worked side by side with new strength, and whenever they faltered, they remembered the image of the lone human who had stood unshaken before the towering alien and had returned alive, not because he had fought with weapons, but because he had fought with spirit, and that memory gave them courage to rise again no matter what shadows lay ahead. As for the human, he did not see himself as a hero. He walked among them as he always had, carrying tools, helping with labor, sharing food and laughter. Yet every time he closed his eyes at night, he felt the echo of that chamber and the eyes of the alien who had seen his heart and chosen to spare him, and he knew that choice had changed not just his fate but the fate of many, and that thought gave him peace. In time, songs were sung and stories were told of the day a human had faced an 8-foot alien and had not bowed, and though the songs grew into legends and the legends into myths, the truth remained simple. It was not strength of arm or sharpness of blade that had saved them. It was the quiet flame of courage burning in the chest of one human who dared to stand when standing seemed impossible, and that truth would outlast stone and steel, for it was written not in monuments, but in the hearts of those who came after. And so the story ended not with the roar of battle, but with the steady steps of a man returning to his people with nothing more than his will and his words. And though history might forget his name, the courage of the human who risked everything to face an 8-foot alien would live on forever in the spirit of humanity itself. The end.